Hi, and welcome to this week's Hospitality News Roundup, where we've got 5 articles to cover. They're not really huge ones in and of themselves, but they're little things that it's worth keeping an eye on. There's the lack of staff, there's early mildew, there's high street auctions, the young people avoiding pubs, and a consultation on pavement licences. So the first article is about lack of staff in pubs still being an issue. The Office of National Statistics have revealed that there's 107,000 vacancies in hospitality in the quarter of up to April 2024. Now, that's not just pubs, it's restaurants, cafes, nightclubs, hotels, all of those sorts of things which we cover in here. Now, this is 15% higher than pre-pandemic levels. So it's not just the whole COVID, people didn't want to come back in after COVID. It is quite a serious issue, and it seems to be getting much worse. But what these figures also haven't taken into account is the amount of pubs that have closed in the recent years. So all of the staff that were working at those could well have gone on to work in other places, filling the gaps that would have been there. So if all of those pubs were still open, that figure would be much, much higher, probably closer to the 150,000 mark. So this is a massive problem that we've got in hospitality. Is getting hold of staff. Now, in that time period, the wages have gone up by 9.5%, and still the customers can't get them in. And it seems to be an ongoing effect caused by both Brexit, when a lot of Europeans moved away from England, and the overall state of the economy. It doesn't make the UK an attractive place for young people to come and work, and it's a lot of the young people who make up a lot of the jobs in hospitality. I mean, you've got the standard things of all of the Irish behind the bars, the Italians, the Polish, all working in the hospitality, in hotels and in bars. Now, there's no point for them to come to England anymore. It's not a desirable place to be, it seems. So we're having to fill those roles from, homegrown talent, as it were, and there just aren't enough people to do that. So it's something that's going to have to be addressed, and it doesn't help that it is known as an incredibly hard job. And then you get companies like allegedly Brewdog's Waterloo Place, where the staff are treated like absolute shit. So something has got to be done, and it needs to be done at a grassroots level. Otherwise, we're going to see pubs closing because they just can't afford to hire in any staff, or just can't get hold of any staff. So the next one we're covering is Bordeaux is seeing early mildew. And this is a big problem. It's a very virulent strain that they get in. It's everywhere. So this isn't just this one thing. This is another example of what's happening with the current weather that we're getting, this whole climate change that we're seeing. So in England, Germany, especially in England, we're seeing that farmers can't plant their grain. I've covered this before, because it's just too wet and the fields are waterlogged. And throughout the rest of the world, we're seeing that there's drought. We're seeing this now affecting the wine industry as well. Now, farmers can adapt their grain and check what their farming practices. They can adapt it year upon year, and it can be quite quick to change what they grow. But for grapes, grapevines have got old. They take a while to get established. They grow for up to about 20 years before the harvest starts reducing. So this is a much longer term issue that we're likely to see here. So we are going to expect to see some shortages and some changes to the wine world, and it's really quite worrying that they've not been able to catch this before, because I know that vineyard owners are incredibly detailed about the records that they keep, constantly monitoring the amount of rainfall, the temperatures, the sunlight hours, the level of sunlight, the pH in the soil. They have these fish techniques that monitor everything. So that this has changed so quickly that they've not been able to catch it is a really worrying sign for it. Because everything we eat or drink is grown in somewhere reliant on agriculture. So, yeah, that's a bit worrying, that is. On to some slightly better news, potentially better news. The government has announced a new scheme for high street auctions. So the way it works is local councils can take control. So if a building of a unit, a premises, has been empty for more than a year, the local council can take over it. They can auction off a lease on it, so it's up to 5 years, so no longer than that, and there's no reserve on that. So if nobody else is interested, you could take on the lease for a couple of quid. Now, things it's not saying in this, there's a lot of detail it's not saying, is what the rent will be. But there's, because you buy the lease and then you pay the rent. It could well be that there is no rent. It could well be the council set the rent. It could well be that that's part of the auction. It's not really gone into a lot of details of how this will actually work. It's also not covered things like what the planning applications will be. So it could be that you see a shop and you want to turn it into a micropub for 5 years. It could well be that there's an empty pub and somebody wants to turn it into a supermarket for 5 years. It's not really covered the actual working details of this, so we're going to have a look at it. But there's potentially good news there. It could mean that a lot of startup companies wanting to take a risk, take a chance, but without that huge rent and lease risk, are able to do so. It could mean that we just see all the multinationals moving premises every 5 years with as they snap up all of the auction, the leases at auction. We'll have to see what actually comes out of that. Potentially good idea. Really depends on how it gets implemented as to whether or not it actually works. And next one then. So Sacha Lord, the nighttime economy advisor of Greater Manchester, has said that young people are avoiding pubs because of social media. He says they're not going to pubs and clubs because they don't want photos of themselves drunk with kebab sauce down their front put out online. No, I think he's drawing the wrong conclusions from some figures that come out. So the figures that come out are saying that 1 in 5 or 20% of under 25s don't drink alcohol. And that's the conclusion he drew from that. Well, no, I don't agree with this, especially as he also goes on to say that while the nightclubs are dying, what is succeeding is the big festivals, and people are going out and to these festivals. People are going to these because they're an occasion. People are skint. They don't have the money for occasional drinking anymore. They just go for the occasions. And he really should know this. He is one of the organisers of Parklife, which is a massive festival in Manchester. And people go there and they do drink. So they do drink. They just don't drink as much because they can't afford to. Plus, there's a lot of people just going in for the whole health aspect of it now. We've been told for at least a generation or so that alcohol is bad for your health. And if you want to live longer, you have to go to the gym, you have to exercise, you have to eat healthily, and people are taking that on board and they're doing that. So right kind of ideas, wrong conclusions from it, I personally think. Be interested to sit down with him and have a chat about that over a pint or two, and I'll give Sacha Lord his dues. He does a lot for smaller venues in Manchester. Every now and again he'll just put his own money behind a bar for a small independent pub and pay for drinks for everyone for a few hours, and he's really quite good like that. Gets people out and about, and he does it in a really good way. So I think he needs to get out a little bit more though, to be quite honest, and have a chat with people in the trade at much lower level rather than at the larger corporate level that he generally tends to deal with. So finally, the government have launched quietly, very, very quietly launched a consultation into the future laws around the sales of alcohol for licensed pavement areas. So this easement of these came in during COVID lockdowns. So for most places, if you want to sit outside the pub and drink at a couple of tables and that, they need a licensed pavement area. Now this is handled by the local councils. Some of them will charge you a fee to apply and then an annual fee. Others will just say, yeah, go for it. It's entirely down to them how they do it. Now, during the COVID lockdowns when we could only sit outside, the government just steamrolled over that and said, yeah, that's fine. Even if you've only got an on-sale licence, you can sell takeouts and people can stand in the streets and drink as long as they're not causing any issues. Now, after the lockdowns finished, the easements of this continued and then they extended it. Now, the current extension runs out at the end of March next year, and they're looking now to deal with this on a more permanent basis. So they're giving themselves a reasonable amount of time, and there's 3 options that are available. The first is so that on-sale only licence holders can continue with off-sales with no variation to their licence, and that would allow it's basically a continued state of affairs on a permanent basis, and that would allow places to do takeaways and deliveries without having to change their license. But to be quite honest, if that's become a part of their business, they really should have applied for a variation of license now, or at least be prepared for that. The second option is to amend the Licensing Act so that on sales include a licensed pavement area. So this is a little bit of a weird thing with the licenses at the moment. If you have a premises license, it is only for the premises that you've marked on your license application. A lot of the time that doesn't include a beer garden because people don't think to put the beer garden in, or the beer garden comes in later. It really almost never includes the pavement because you can't license a public right of way. So, or rather the public foot highway. So to do that, you need that separate pavement license that the government, so the local council can give and take away as they see fit. So amending the Licensing Act will mean that your on sales include that area. So you don't need to have it as an off sale because even though you're still at the pub, as it were, you're not on their premises, you are off their premises in the licensed area. So for a pub to have that, it needs to have both an on and off sales license. Now, on and off sales licenses are the norm these days. It's rare that you don't get both. But there's a lot of places around that have got old licenses where this still applies to. So this would be a change so that on sales is on your premises or on your licensed premises, your licensed pavement area. And then the third option is to amend the Licensing Act so that on sales include not just your own licensed premises area, but any nearby licensed premises area. So this works in places where there's several bars on a street and they've all got their own areas sectioned off in the street where you can sit outside and drink. And you're in for a group and one of you goes into one place and you sit down and say the majority of your group is in one place and you sit down in that group's area, in that pub's area, and you're having drinks, but one of you wants something from somewhere else. They can nip into next door and get a drink from there and then still sit with you. Currently you can't, but by law, but the easements allow for all of this. So it's a very useful amendment for that. So if you've got any views on that, you need to get them in by midnight on the 11th of July this year. So it's not that long to do it. And I would advise any pub with a premises, with a pavement license or with outside drinking to put their views into that because it is going to become law and it's going to be what we all then have to live with. So that's it for this week. It's a few interesting things, mostly about the future of what's going on, as well as what is sort of like affecting us in the past with the shortages and how that is going to keep going on. So yeah, it's very interesting, these little nuggets. No sort of like big, controversial news, but definitely stuff that we need to keep an eye on as we go forward. So cheers.